Hey everybody, it's Bruce here speaking from WaterBear, the College of Music. Now I'm going to tell you one of my old war stories today. I like doing this, I've got into it, and the thing is there's always a point about my stories, I think. I'm always thinking, how does this apply to a band today? And this story is exactly that, and it's entitled How Bryan Adams Saved the Day. People often talk about the old music business as this kind of rose-tinted spectacles, about how amazing it was when we had budget. And it is true, we were manufacturing CDs for about less than 50p and selling them in the shops for 15 quid plus. It was the closest thing to printing money that you could possibly imagine, till file sharing happened. So that's great, an awesome time to be in the music business in your early 20s, in the early 90s, amazing. What people don't tend to remember is the pressure you had, because there was no DIY industry. There was an indie scene, but you couldn't reach your audience, with digital stuff, with social media like you can today. So you had to fight tooth and nail to be in the club. So Little Angels were coming up to the critical third album. For rock bands, it's often the third album that makes or breaks the whole thing. If you don't really kick off on that third album, back then it was kind of all over. So there's all pressure on us. And we are putting together our third album, which was called Jam, which was scheduled to be released in 1994. And I think it was the back end of 93, we were on tour with Bryan Adams. And this was the absolute height. It was pre-Kurt Cobain. It was pre-Nirvana, really. It was pre-Teen Spirit, basically. So it was the height of commercial rock. And we are touring with probably the biggest artist in that genre. And it's the biggest genre in the world. And we're going around Europe. And he'd just released a track called Everything I Do, which had been on a Robin Hood film. So we turn up to the first gig, and he's a lovely guy, we're chatting, and he said, midweek of it's going to be number one. We're like, how fantastic is that? Bryan, the record is going to be number one. Anyway, it was number one. I think we were on tour for about 6-7 weeks. Every week, not only was it number one and stayed there, but it was in more and more countries. So it became this worldwide, it was basically the biggest record in the world while we were on tour with him. So every night was like, it was like the biggest party you could possibly imagine, because back then, it would be very cool now, okay? But back then, there was no internet, so people were physically buying it. Physically buying it. Imagine all those CDs, imagine what it did for his album sales. It was into the millions and millions and millions. In fact, we should put a statistic here of how many records he sold. So imagine that. I mean, imagine it today when you can get in the charts with, 4,000 records, and he's putting out numbers like that. This was big, and it was when music was more important. There was no computer games, music was life. And we were at the absolute top of the tree. So there's a big pressure on us to deliver on our third album. So we'd written, I think Toby had written a track called Too Much Too Young, which was scheduled to be the lead single. I think it was Toby, I can't remember who wrote it, but Toby's lyric, Toby drove that song. And it was a real stadium rock song. It was designed, it was written with those big gigs in mind, with the tempo and a kind of, we're always trying to find a song that would make a stadium full of people stand up. So Toby's written this song, and it's got this baggy kind of thing to it, a sing-along chorus. And someone said, I wonder if, might have been Kevin, our manager, said, I wonder if Bryan would sing backing vocals on this. So we just called him up, and he turned up to Jacob's studio in Surrey, I think it is. Jacob's, like many studios, no longer there anymore. Anyway, it was a great studio, 2 different control room setups, Neve sort of desk, a really nice place, but not super flash. It wasn't Abbey Road, it was just really good, solid working studio. Bryan turns up, and the first thing you notice is he's got a Land Rover that he's just bought off some farmer for 500 quid. So he turns up in this battered Land Rover, and you think, what's in it for him? Well, he probably quite likes working with new bands, but he's just helping out, really. So we have a great day, and he sings backing vocals all over the tune, and you can hear it. When it's him, you can hear it a mile off, So why was this so important and so valuable? Well, it was our careers were resting on this record and resting on this first single, and it all comes down to this razor edge point where the plugger takes that record, finished, mixed, Bryan Adams on it, to Radio 1, because there were so few routes then. It was Radio 1, Top of the Pops, or nothing. You got those two, you had a hit, you had a career. If you didn't, you were on thin ice. And it boils down to the people around the room on that day, what other records are competing for the playlist positions, and how they feel about it. So you can imagine the difference to that plugger's job when they go in and go, I've got this band, Little Angels, you might have heard of them, you've played them a bit already, yeah, it's a very strong record. That's one story. You go in and go, I've got a record, and Bryan Adams is singing on it. After the record that's been about the biggest record the planet's seen for a decade, you know. So, of course, it gets on the radio, it goes like the clappers, and loads of things lined up to make that album, when it got released, a #1 album. So Bryan Adams got us on the radio, big part of getting us a #1 album, and without that one afternoon with him, I might not be here speaking to you today. Funny how life goes, isn't it? So, what can we take from this? People do this all the time to this day. If you've got a new band, you've got a great record, just bring in someone that's really cool to do a little bit of backing vocals or a couple of overdubs, and it adds to the story, it adds to your credibility. Now, you can do it as a favour, as we did with Bryan, or you can just pay bits of money to get someone from a really cool band to come and do a bit of a session. Not everyone will agree to it, but most will. If you take George Donahue, who's produced a band called River Becomes Ocean. George teaches at WaterBear. And River Becomes Ocean brought in Liam from the Cancer Bats. And again, it really worked. Liam came and sang on the record. Everyone had a great time. It just built the story of the record. Everybody took the band really seriously. The record was really successful. So there's nothing to stop you doing this. So thank you for listening patiently to the old war stories. And if you want more of this stuff, then obviously like and subscribe. And if music's become an important part of your life and you want to study a degree with us or a master's qualification with us, then drop us a line. We'd love to hear all about you and your music and your plans.